The lantern light flickered across the sleeping woman's face, and Jack Thornton froze in the doorway of his hay barn, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip before he registered that she posed no threat at all. She was curled into the hay like a wounded animal seeking shelter, her dark hair tangled with bits of straw, her dress torn and dusty from what must have been days of hard travel across the unforgiving Texas plains. It was late September in 1882, and the night air had turned cold enough to see his breath. Yet this stranger had sought refuge in his barn rather than knock on his door, and something about that quiet desperation made his chest tighten with an emotion he could not quite name. He stood there for a long moment, studying her in the golden lamplight. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with a face that would have been beautiful if not for the exhaustion etched into every line, the hollows beneath her cheekbones that spoke of hunger, and the purple bruise blooming along her jaw. Her hands were folded beneath her cheek, and even in sleep, they trembled slightly. Jack had seen enough trouble in his 32 years to recognize it when it came calling, and this woman had trouble written all over her like a wanted poster. He backed out of the barn slowly, careful not to wake her. Whatever she was running from, she needed rest more than she needed questions. He latched the door quietly behind him and made his way back to the small ranch house he had built with his own hands 5 years ago when he had finally saved enough money to buy this land outside of San Antonio. The house was modest but sturdy, much like Jack himself, with whitewashed walls and a covered porch where he spent his evenings watching the sun set over his small herd of cattle. Sleep did not come easy that night. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the woman in his barn. He should have woken her, demanded to know who she was and what she was doing on his property. But something had stopped him, some instinct that told him she was not a threat, but rather someone in need of help. Jack had always had a soft spot for strays, whether they were animals or people, much to the amusement of his neighbors who considered him too soft-hearted for a rancher. Before dawn broke, Jack rose and dressed quickly in the pre-morning darkness. He built up the fire in his cook stove and set about making breakfast with more care than he usually took for his solitary meals. He fried bacon until it was crispy, scrambled eggs with butter, and made biscuits from his mother's recipe, the one thing she had taught him before she passed when he was 17. He brewed strong coffee and arranged everything on a tin plate, covering it with a clean cloth to keep it warm. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east as he carried the breakfast across the yard to the barn. His boots crunched softly on the frost-tipped grass, and somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed. He set the plate down carefully just inside the barn door, along with a cup of steaming coffee, and then he retreated without looking to see if she was awake. Whatever her story was, she could tell him when she was ready. Jack went about his morning chores with one eye always drifting back toward the barn. He fed his horses, checked on his cattle in the near pasture, and repaired a section of fence that had been bothering him for weeks. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning frost, and still the barn door remained closed. He was beginning to wonder if she had somehow slipped away when he finally saw movement. The barn door opened slowly, cautiously, and the woman emerged into the sunlight like a deer testing the safety of a clearing. She looked around the yard until her eyes found him standing by the corral. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the distance, and Jack was struck again by the wariness in her face, the way she held herself ready to bolt at the slightest sign of danger. He raised one hand slowly in greeting, keeping his movements calm and unthreatening. She did not run. Instead, she lifted the empty plate slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, and then she spoke, her voice carrying across the yard clear and steady despite whatever fear she must have been feeling. "Thank you for the breakfast," she called, "and for not turning me out last night. Jack walked toward her slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. Up close in the daylight, he could see that his first assessment had been correct. She was young and would have been beautiful if not for the marks of hardship on her. Her eyes were a striking green, like new grass in spring, and they watched him with a mixture of gratitude and caution. "You are welcome to stay as long as you need," he said simply. "I am Jack Thornton. This is my ranch." She hesitated, and he could see her weighing whether to give him her real name. "Elizabeth," she said finally. "Elizabeth Ward." "I apologize for trespassing on your property. I was traveling and got caught after dark. Your barn was unlocked." "It usually is," Jack said with a slight smile. "Not much call for locks out here." "Where are you traveling to, Miss Ward?" The question hung in the air between them, and he saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear, perhaps, or pain. "West," she said vaguely. "I have family in California." It was a lie, or at least not the whole truth, but Jack did not press. "That is a long journey to make alone," he observed. "Dangerous, too." "I manage," she said, lifting her chin slightly. There was pride there beneath the exhaustion, a strength that had kept her going despite whatever circumstances had driven her to sleep in a stranger's barn. "I am sure you do," Jack said. "But if you need a place to rest for a day or two to get your strength back, the offer stands. I have a spare room in the house. It would be more comfortable than the hay." Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly. "I could not impose like that." "It is not an imposition if it is offered freely," Jack countered. "And before you worry, I am a respectable man, Miss Ward. I will not bother you or expect anything in return for simple hospitality. You have my word on that." She studied his face for a long moment, and Jack let her look, knowing that whatever she saw there would have to be enough to convince her. He was not a handsome man by any stretch of imagination, with his weathered face and sun-bleached hair, but he had an honest face, people said, the kind of face you could trust. "One day," Elizabeth said finally, "if you are certain it is no trouble at all," Jack assured her. "Come on inside. You look like you could use another meal and maybe a bath." The mention of a bath made her eyes go bright with longing, and Jack hid a smile as he led her toward the house. He showed her to the spare room, which was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand. While she looked around with barely concealed wonder, Jack hauled water from the pump and heated it on the stove for a bath. "There are towels in the cupboard," he told her, pointing toward the small bathing room off the kitchen. "Take your time. I will be outside if you need anything." He gave her privacy, heading back out to work on his chores, but his mind was not on mending fences or checking cattle. He kept thinking about the bruise on her jaw, the fear in her eyes when he asked where she was going. Elizabeth Ward was running from something, and Jack had a sinking feeling that whatever it was might come looking for her. Inside the house, Elizabeth sank into the hot bath with a sigh that was almost a sob. She could not remember the last time she had felt truly clean, truly safe, even if that safety might be an illusion. She scrubbed the dirt and dust from her skin, washed her hair with the plain soap Jack had left for her, and let the heat soak into her aching muscles. When she finally emerged, pink-skinned and clean, she found that someone had left a simple dress on the bed in the spare room. It was too big for her, probably had belonged to Jack's mother or sister, but it was clean and whole, without the tears and stains that had made her own dress almost unwearable. She slipped it on, rolling up the sleeves and gathering the waist as best she could, and for the first time in weeks, she felt almost human again. Jack was in the kitchen when she came out, stirring a pot of stew that smelled like heaven. He glanced up and nodded approvingly. "That dress suits you better than it ever suited my mother." She was a stout woman, God rest her soul. "I cannot take your mother's dress," Elizabeth protested. "She has been gone 10 years, Jack said matter-of-factly. And I think she would be glad to know her things were being put to good use rather than collecting dust in a trunk. Are you hungry? Elizabeth's stomach answered for her with an audible growl, and she felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Jack just laughed, a warm sound that made something inside her chest unknot slightly. He ladled stew into 2 bowls and set them on the small kitchen table, then cut thick slices of bread to go with it. They ate in silence for a while, and Elizabeth tried not to wolf down the food too quickly, tried to maintain some semblance of manners even though she was so hungry she could have eaten twice her portion. Jack did not seem to notice or care, eating his own meal with the steady patience of a man who had long ago grown comfortable with silence. How long have you had this ranch? Elizabeth asked finally, needing to fill the quiet with something other than the sound of her own thoughts. 5 years this past spring, Jack said. Saved up for years to buy the land, then built the house and barn myself. Started with just a few head of cattle and built up from there. It is not much, but it is mine. There was pride in his voice, but also contentment, and Elizabeth felt a pang of envy. What would it be like to have a place that was truly yours, to build something with your own hands and know that no one could take it away? She had never known that kind of security. Her life had been one of constant movement, first as a child following her father's failed business ventures from town to town, and then, after his death, trying to survive on her own in a world that had little mercy for women alone. It must be satisfying, she said quietly, to have something that belongs to you. Jack looked at her and she saw understanding in his eyes. It is, he agreed, but it can be lonely too. This land is beautiful, but it does not talk back. Elizabeth smiled despite herself. No, I suppose it does not. What about you, Miss Ward? Jack asked, his tone carefully casual. What did you do before you started traveling west? The question was innocent enough, but Elizabeth felt her walls go up automatically. She could not tell him the truth. Could not tell him about the man she had been forced to marry, the wealthy rancher twice her age who had seemed charming at first but had revealed his true nature once the vows were spoken. Could not tell him about the months of living in fear, of bruises hidden beneath long sleeves, of nights spent wondering if he would finally go too far and kill her. Could not tell him about the moment she had finally found the courage to run, stealing away in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on her back. I worked as a seamstress, she said, which was at least partially true. She had sewn to make extra money when her husband's moods made it possible. In Houston. But the work dried up, and I heard there were opportunities in California. Another lie, or at least a misdirection, but what choice did she have? If Jack knew the truth, he might feel obligated to send her back. Or worse, her husband might come looking and put Jack in danger for harboring her. The thought of this kind man getting hurt because of her made her stomach turn. Houston is a long way from here, Jack observed. You must have been traveling for weeks. Nearly a month, Elizabeth said, which was the truth. A month of walking, of catching occasional rides on wagons with families heading west, of sleeping rough and eating whatever she could find or afford with the few coins she had managed to take with her. A month of looking over her shoulder, terrified that every rider on the horizon might be her husband or one of his men come to drag her back. That is a hard journey for anyone, Jack said gently. Especially a woman alone. Elizabeth lifted her chin. I am stronger than I look. I do not doubt it, Jack said. Anyone who can survive a month on the trail and still have fire in their eyes is strong indeed. But strength and stubbornness are not always enough, Miss Ward. The world can be cruel to those without protection. I know that better than most, Elizabeth said, and heard the bitterness in her own voice. Jack was quiet for a moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to squirm. Whatever you are running from, he said finally, you do not have to tell me about it. But I want you to know that you are safe here, for as long as you need to be. I am a man of my word, and I give you my word now that no harm will come to you while you are under my roof." Elizabeth felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She could not remember the last time anyone had offered her kindness without expecting something in return. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help a stranger?" Jack shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "My mother used to say that we are all strangers until someone takes the time to know us. And I suppose I know what it is like to need help and not have anywhere to turn. When I was younger, just starting out, I got caught in a bad situation. A man I did not know gave me a chance when he did not have to. I have always tried to pay that forward when I can." They cleaned up the dishes together in companionable silence, and then Jack showed her around the ranch properly. He introduced her to his horses, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Copper and a sweet-tempered mare named Daisy. He pointed out the cattle grazing in the distance, explained his plans to expand his herd, and maybe build a larger barn in the next year or two. As he talked, Elizabeth found herself relaxing in a way she had not in months, listening to the calm steadiness of his voice and watching the way his hands moved when he described his dreams for the ranch. The day passed quietly, peacefully, and when evening came, Jack made a simple supper of beans and cornbread. They ate on the porch, watching the sun sink toward the horizon in a blaze of orange and gold, and Elizabeth felt something inside her begin to thaw. She had forgotten what it felt like to be at peace, to not be afraid every moment. "One day might not be enough," she said quietly as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "If the offer still stands, I would like to stay a little longer. Just a few days to rest and gather my strength before I move on." Jack turned to look at her, his face shadowed in the twilight. "Stay as long as you need," he said. "There is no rush, and if you would like to earn your keep, I could use help around here. I am not asking you to work," he added quickly. "But if it would make you feel better about accepting hospitality, there is always mending to be done, meals to cook, things like that." "I would like that," Elizabeth said, and realized she meant it. The thought of staying here, of having something useful to do with her hands, of not being alone for the first time in so long, made something warm bloom in her chest. The days that followed fell into an easy rhythm. Elizabeth woke early to help Jack with breakfast, then spent her mornings mending his clothes and linens, tasks that had been neglected for too long by a bachelor living alone. She discovered that Jack was a terrible cook beyond basic staples, so she took over the kitchen, making proper meals with the supplies he had in his pantry. In the afternoons, she helped where she could with lighter chores, feeding the chickens, tending the small vegetable garden, gathering eggs. Jack, for his part, seemed content with the arrangement. He went about his work as always, but Elizabeth noticed that he made excuses to come back to the house more often, to check if she needed anything or simply to talk for a few minutes. They began to share meals together regularly, and the conversation flowed more easily each day. Jack told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about losing his parents young and making his way west to find his fortune. Elizabeth shared carefully edited stories about her childhood, about her father's restless nature, and her mother's quiet strength before she died when Elizabeth was 12. She did not tell him about her husband. That shadow remained between them, unspoken but present in the way she sometimes flinched at sudden movements, in the nightmares that occasionally woke her crying out in the darkness. If Jack noticed, and she suspected he did, he was kind enough not to mention it. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Elizabeth knew she should move on, that staying too long was dangerous for both of them. But every morning she woke up in the small clean room, heard Jack moving around in the kitchen, and told herself just one more day. Just one more day of feeling safe. Just one more day of this strange, quiet contentment that had begun to grow inside her like a seedling reaching toward sunlight. She was hanging laundry on the line one bright October morning when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Her heart leaped into her throat and she dropped the shirt she had been pinning, her hands going cold with sudden terror. This was it. He had found her. After all this time, all these miles, her husband had tracked her down. But when she forced herself to look toward the road, she saw it was not her husband but rather 3 riders she did not recognize, rough-looking men with dust-covered clothes and hard eyes. They reined in their horses near the barn where Jack was working, and Elizabeth saw him straighten up, setting down his tools and walking over to meet them with a casual confidence that belied the tension she could see in his shoulders. She could not hear what was being said, but she saw the way the lead rider gestured toward the house toward her. Her blood turned to ice. They were asking about her. Somehow they knew she was here. Without thinking, she turned and ran for the house, her mind racing with panic. She had to hide. She had to get away before they took her back to him. She was throwing her few belongings into a sack when Jack appeared in the doorway of her room. "Elizabeth," he said calmly, "it is all right, they are gone." "They were asking about me," she said, her voice high and tight with fear. "I know they were. I have to leave. I should never have stayed this long. I have put you in danger." "They were not asking about you," Jack said, stepping into the room. "They were drifters looking for work, wondering if I was hiring hands for the season. I sent them on toward the big ranches south of here." Elizabeth stopped her frantic packing, turning to look at him. "You are certain?" "I am certain," Jack said gently. "But Elizabeth, I think it is time you told me what you are so afraid of. Who are you running from?" She sank down on the edge of the bed, the sack falling from her nerveless fingers. The fight went out of her all at once, leaving her feeling hollow and exhausted. "My husband," she whispered. "I am running from my husband." Jack's jaw tightened and she saw anger flash in his eyes, though she knew instinctively it was not directed at her. "Did he hurt you?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. Elizabeth nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her hand went unconsciously to her ribs, where the bruises had finally faded, but the memory remained sharp as broken glass. "How long were you married?" 8 months, Elizabeth said. "He was a wealthy rancher near Houston. I was alone after my father died, desperate and foolish. He seemed kind at first, respectable. He courted me properly, said all the right things. I thought I was lucky that someone like him would want to marry someone like me. I did not see the truth until it was too late, until we were married and I was trapped." The words came spilling out now, faster and faster, as if saying them aloud could somehow make the weight of them lighter. She told him about the first time her husband had hit her, how he had apologized afterward and sworn it would never happen again. About how it had happened again and again, each time worse than the last. About how he had isolated her, driven away anyone who might have been her friend, until she had no one to turn to and nowhere to go. About the night she had finally realized that if she did not leave, he would eventually kill her. "I stole money from his desk," she said, her voice shaking, "just enough to get away. I knew he would come after me, that he would see it as theft, as defiance. Men like him do not let their property go willingly, so I ran and I have been running ever since. I am sorry, Jack. I should have told you from the beginning. I should never have put you at risk by staying here." When she finally fell silent, Jack was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and sat down beside her on the bed, careful to keep a respectful distance between them. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said firmly. "Nothing, do you hear me? What happened to you was not your fault, and you had every right to run to save your own life. But if he finds me here, if he comes looking, he will blame you for hiding me. He has money influence. He could make trouble for you, hurt you even." "Let him try," Jack said, and there was steel in his voice now. "I am not afraid of some bully who beats women. And you are not property, Elizabeth. You are a person, a human being with the right to be safe and free. No man has the right to hurt you, husband or not. Elizabeth felt tears spilling down her cheeks, hot and unstoppable. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she whispered. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Jack said. "I know you are brave and strong and good. I know that you deserve better than what you have been given. And I know that, over these past weeks, I have come to care about you a great deal more than is probably wise." Elizabeth's breath caught. She turned to look at him, really look at him, and saw the truth written plain on his honest face. "Jack," she breathed, not sure what she meant to say, what she could possibly say to that. "I am not asking you for anything," he said quickly. "I know you have been hurt, that you need time. I just want you to know that you are not alone anymore. Whatever happens, wherever you decide to go from here, you have a friend, you have me." Without thinking, Elizabeth reached out and took his hand. His palm was calloused and warm, solid and real, and she held onto it like an anchor in a storm. "I do not want to leave," she admitted. "I know I should, that it would be safer for both of us, but I do not want to go. Being here with you is the first time I have felt safe in so long. The first time I have felt like maybe I could have a life again instead of just surviving day to day." Jack's fingers tightened around hers. "Then stay," he said simply. "Stay as long as you want. We will figure out the rest together." Over the following weeks, something shifted between them. The easy friendship that had been growing deepened into something more. Something neither of them spoke of directly, but both felt in the air like the change of seasons. Jack began to seek out excuses to be near her, to brush against her hand when he passed her something at dinner, to linger in the kitchen while she cooked. Elizabeth found herself watching for him, listening for his footsteps, feeling her heart lift when he came into view. She began to notice things about him she had not paid attention to before. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands when he worked with the horses, the way he hummed tunelessly while he did his chores, off-key but cheerful. The patience he showed with everything and everyone, never rushing, never angry. He was so different from her husband, so fundamentally decent and kind, that sometimes she could hardly believe he was real. One evening in late November, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Jack said, "Elizabeth, there is something I need to ask you." She looked at him, her heart suddenly racing. "What is it?" "Winter is coming," he said. "It gets cold out here, and the roads will be difficult if not impossible once the snows start. If you are still planning to go to California, you should probably leave soon, before the weather turns." Elizabeth's chest tightened. She had known this conversation was coming, had been dreading it. "I know," she said quietly. "But if you wanted to stay," Jack continued, his eyes fixed on the horizon, "if you wanted to stay here through the winter or longer than that, maybe permanently, well, that would be all right with me. More than all right, if I am being honest." "Jack," Elizabeth whispered. He turned to look at her then, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "I know it has not been that long," he said. "I know you have been hurt, and you probably are not ready to trust another man, and I understand that. But I have to tell you how I feel, Elizabeth. These past weeks with you here have been the happiest of my life. You make this house feel like a home instead of just a place I sleep. You make me laugh. You make me want to be better, to do better. And I find myself thinking about a future I had stopped dreaming about, a future with someone to share this life with, someone to share everything with." Elizabeth felt tears gathering in her eyes again, but they were different tears than before. "I am still married," she said, her voice breaking. "Legally, I am still his wife." "Laws can be changed," Jack said. "Marriages can be dissolved, especially when there is cruelty involved. It would not be easy and it would take time, but it could be done." "If that is what you wanted." "What I want," Elizabeth said, and had to stop, had to take a breath because her heart was so full she could barely speak. "What I want is to stay here with you." What I want is to wake up every morning in this house and see your face and know that I am safe, that I am cared for. What I want is to be free of him, truly free, so that I can start a new life. With you." Jack reached out and cupped her face gently in his hands, his touch feather-light, as if he was afraid she might break. "Then that is what we will do," he said. "We will find a lawyer, file papers for an annulment or a divorce. We will make sure you are legally free of him. And once you are, if you still feel the same way, I would be honored if you would consent to be my wife. My real wife, in a marriage built on respect and love instead of fear." "I will still feel the same way," Elizabeth said, her voice fierce with certainty. "I know my own heart, Jack. I know what I want now, and what I want is you." He kissed her then, soft and careful and achingly sweet, and Elizabeth felt something inside her chest crack open, felt years of pain and fear begin to drain away. This was what it was supposed to feel like, she realized. This tenderness, this respect, this feeling of being cherished instead of owned. This was what she had been searching for without even knowing it when she ran into the night all those weeks ago. They spent the winter making plans and building a life together. Jack took her into San Antonio to see a lawyer, a serious man with kind eyes who listened to her story and promised to help. He explained that getting a divorce would be difficult, that Texas law did not look kindly on women who left their husbands, but that cases involving cruelty and abuse could sometimes be argued successfully, especially if there was evidence and testimony. Elizabeth had both. The bruises might have faded, but she had scars, and she had her own testimony of what had been endured. The lawyer filed the papers, and they waited, knowing it could be months before anything was resolved. In the meantime, Elizabeth and Jack existed in a strange sort of limbo, bound together by love but not yet able to make it official. Jack never pushed her, never asked for more than she was ready to give. He courted her the way she should have been courted the first time, with small gifts and gentle words, with patience and kindness. He brought her wildflowers he picked while checking his fences. He taught her to ride Daisy, laughing when she nearly fell off but always there to steady her. He read to her in the evenings from his small collection of books, his voice washing over her like music. Elizabeth bloomed under his care like a plant that had been kept too long in darkness, and was finally given light. She laughed more, smiled more, began to believe that maybe she could actually have the life she had started to dream about. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, became a true partner in its operation rather than just a guest. She learned to help birth a calf one frozen January morning, her hands slippery with blood and her heart pounding with the miracle of new life. She learned to shoot, spending afternoons practicing with Jack's rifle until she could hit a target more often than not. "I never want to be helpless again," she told Jack when he asked why it was so important to her. "I want to know I can protect myself, protect this place, protect you if I need to." "You are the strongest person I know," Jack said and kissed her forehead, "but I will teach you anyway if it gives you peace of mind." Spring came slowly, melting the winter snows and turning the world green again. With the thaw came a letter from the lawyer. Elizabeth's hands shook as she opened it, hardly daring to hope. Jack stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, as she read the words that would change everything. The divorce had been granted. On the grounds of extreme cruelty and abandonment of marital duties, the judge had dissolved her marriage. She was free. Legally, officially, completely free. Elizabeth looked up at Jack with tears streaming down her face, and he caught her as she threw herself into his arms. "I am free," she sobbed into his shoulder. "Jack, I am free." "I know, sweetheart," he murmured, holding her tight. "I know, it is over. He can never hurt you again." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in San Antonio. Elizabeth wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself, and Jack wore his best suit, which was slightly too tight in the shoulders but made him look handsome and solid and real. They spoke their vows before God and a handful of witnesses, Jack's neighbors who had become their friends. And this time when Elizabeth said the word obey, Jack had shaken his head. "We will honor each other," he had said instead. "As equals, as partners, that is the vow I want from you." So that was what they promised. To honor each other, to care for each other, to build a life together based on trust and respect and love. When Jack kissed her at the end of the ceremony, Elizabeth felt like she was finally, truly beginning her life. The years that followed were good ones, full and rich and satisfying in ways Elizabeth had never imagined possible. The ranch prospered under their joint care, growing from a modest operation into one of the most successful in the area. They worked side by side, Jack and Elizabeth, equal partners in all things. She proved to have a head for business, managing their accounts and negotiating deals with buyers, while Jack focused on the daily operations and care of the herd. Their first child, a son they named Samuel after Jack's father, was born in the spring of 1884. Elizabeth labored for hours with Jack by her side, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement, and when the baby finally came squalling into the world, Jack wept openly with joy. He held his son with such tenderness, such awe, that Elizabeth fell in love with him all over again. Samuel was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Rose, who had her mother's green eyes and her father's quiet strength. And then, 3 years after that, twin boys arrived unexpectedly, Jonathan and David, who kept them all running from morning till night with their endless energy and mischief. The house that had once seemed too large for one lonely man became filled with noise and life and laughter. Children's voices echoed off the walls, and toys littered the floor, and Elizabeth sometimes had to step outside just to breathe, to marvel at the fact that this was her life now. This beautiful, chaotic, messy, perfect life. Jack was an extraordinary father, patient and playful and present in a way that still sometimes made Elizabeth's throat tight with emotion. He taught Samuel to ride almost before the boy could walk, carried Rose on his shoulders through the pastures while she pointed at birds and clouds and begged to know the names of everything, wrestled with the twins in the evening when his work was done. He never raised his hand to them in anger, never spoke to them harshly, and his children grew up knowing they were loved beyond measure. On quiet evenings, after the children were finally asleep, Jack and Elizabeth would sit together on the porch just as they had in the beginning, watching the stars come out and talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they spoke of practical things, plans for the ranch or concerns about the children. Sometimes they spoke of deeper things, dreams and fears and hopes for the future. And sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, content to be together. "Do you ever think about that night?" Jack asked one evening, years after it had all begun. "The night I found you sleeping in my barn, all the time," Elizabeth admitted. "I think about how terrified I was, how desperate. How I had no idea that choosing your barn out of all the places I could have stopped would change my entire life. I think about the breakfast," Jack said with a smile. "How I stood there trying to decide if I should wake you or let you sleep, and finally decided on the breakfast as a compromise. I am glad I did." "I am glad you did too," Elizabeth said. "I was so hungry, but I was even more hungry for kindness, for someone to see me as a person instead of a possession. That breakfast told me you were someone I could trust, even before we spoke a word to each other. I knew the moment I saw you that my life was about to change," Jack said. "I just did not know how much or how grateful I would be for it. You saved me too, you know. I was so lonely before you came, Elizabeth. I had the ranch, had my work, but I did not have a reason to care about any of it beyond simple survival. You gave me that reason. You and the children, this family we have built together, You are everything to me." Elizabeth leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, hay and leather and sun-warmed skin. "We saved each other," she said softly. "I think that is what love is supposed to be. Not one person rescuing the other, but two people choosing each other, day after day, and building something beautiful together." As the years continued to pass, their children grew strong and healthy and happy. Samuel inherited his father's way with animals and took over more and more of the ranch work as he got older, already talking about expanding their operation even further. Rose, gentle and artistic, filled their home with drawings and songs, her creativity a bright spot in every day. The twins, inseparable as they were, developed distinct personalities. Jonathan the dreamer and David the practical one, but both of them quick with laughter and mischief. Elizabeth's past, once so heavy and dark, faded into memory. She heard through distant connections that her former husband had eventually remarried, seeking another woman to control, and she felt only pity for his new wife and relief that she had escaped when she did. That chapter of her life was closed, and she rarely thought about it anymore except to be grateful for how far she had come. The ranch continued to thrive. They added more land, built a larger barn just as Jack had dreamed of doing, hired hands to help with the growing operation. Elizabeth managed it all with the confidence of a woman who knew her own worth, who had fought too hard for this life to take any of it for granted. She was respected in their community, known for her fair dealings and her sharp mind, and if anyone remembered that she had arrived as a stranger sleeping in Jack Thornton's barn all those years ago, no one mentioned it. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jack surprised her by taking her into San Antonio for a celebration dinner, the first time they had been alone together without children in years. He had arranged for Samuel, now a responsible young man of 18, to watch his siblings for the night, and Elizabeth dressed in her finest dress, one Jack had bought for her specially. Over dinner in a restaurant far fancier than anything they usually experienced, Jack took her hand across the table. 20 years, he said, shaking his head in wonder. 20 years since you stumbled into my life and turned everything upside down. 21 years since that night in the barn, Elizabeth corrected with a smile. We should count that year too before we were married. That was when it all really began. You are right, Jack agreed. 21 years since I found the greatest treasure of my life sleeping in the hay and was smart enough to leave her breakfast instead of chasing her off. Smart or soft-hearted? Elizabeth teased. Both, Jack said, grinning. Definitely both. But I have never regretted a moment of it, Elizabeth, not one single moment. You have given me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just existing. You have given me joy. You gave me my life back, Elizabeth said, her voice thick with emotion. You gave me safety and freedom and love. You showed me what it means to be truly cherished. I was so broken when I came here, Jack. I did not know if I would ever feel whole again, but you made me whole. You and this life we have built. They toasted to their years together, to the years still to come. And when they finally returned home late that night, they found their children had decorated the house with wildflowers and hand-drawn signs welcoming them home. It was a small thing, but it made Elizabeth's heart swell with happiness so profound it was almost painful. More years passed, and their children began to forge their own paths. Samuel married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch and started his own small spread nearby, making Jack a grandfather when a baby girl named Lucy arrived. Rose went to study music in Austin, her talent too great to be contained by ranch life, though she came home often and filled the house with her playing whenever she did. The twins, after much deliberation, decided to go into business together, opening a general store in San Antonio that quickly became successful due to their charisma and hard work. Jack and Elizabeth found themselves back where they had started in some ways, alone in the house that had once been so full. But it was a different kind of alone now, comfortable and companionable. Two people who had spent decades learning each other and still found new things to discover. They were sitting on the porch one evening, both in their 60s now, their hair gray and their faces lined but their love as strong as ever, when Elizabeth said, "Do you remember what you told me that first time we talked about my staying? You said your land was beautiful, but it did not talk back." "I remember," Jack said. "I was thinking about that today," Elizabeth continued, "about how lonely you must have been before I came. And how different everything is now. This land is still beautiful, but now it is filled with memories. Every corner of this ranch has a story. That pasture where Samuel learned to ride. The garden where Rose grew her first flowers. The creek where the twins nearly drowned themselves trying to catch fish. The barn where it all began. The barn where I found you," Jack said softly. "Where you found me, really?" "Where we found each other," Elizabeth corrected. She reached over and took his hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after all these years. "I think about that terrified woman who collapsed in your hay sometimes, and I hardly recognize her. She was so scared, so convinced that her life was over. If I could go back and tell her that everything would be all right, that she would find not just safety but happiness beyond her wildest dreams, I wonder if she would believe me." "Would you?" Jack asked. "Believe it?" Elizabeth considered this. "I do not know," she admitted. "I think maybe I would have wanted to, but I was so broken then. It is hard to have faith when you have been hurt as badly as I was. But I am so grateful I kept going, that I made it to your barn that night. I am grateful for every choice that led me here, even the painful ones, because they brought me to you." "I am grateful too," Jack said, "for all of it. For the life we have built, for the family we have raised, for every single day I have gotten to spend with you. You are still the best thing that ever happened to me, Elizabeth Thornton. From that first night until now, you have been my greatest blessing." They sat in silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. A breeze rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and earth. The land stretched out before them, their land, the place they had built together through years of hard work and love. Elizabeth thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the woman she had been and the woman she had become. She thought about fear and courage, about desperation and hope, about the way a single act of kindness could change the entire course of a life. She thought about breakfast left by a barn door, about gentle hands and patient words, about learning to trust again after trust had been shattered. Most of all, she thought about love. Not the twisted, controlling thing she had once mistaken for love, but the real thing, the true thing. Love that was patient and kind, that protected and provided, that allowed her to be fully herself without fear. Love that had given her a family, a home, a life worth living. "Thank you," she said suddenly, squeezing Jack's hand. "For everything. For that breakfast, for your patience, for giving me time to heal, for loving me when I did not know how to love myself. For being exactly who you are." Jack turned to her, his weathered face breaking into the smile she had loved for more than 2 decades. "Thank you for staying," he said simply. "Thank you for choosing me, for choosing this life. Thank you for making my house a home and my days worth living. Thank you for being my wife, my partner, my best friend." As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, they remained on the porch. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. The ranch was quiet around them, peaceful in the evening calm, and Elizabeth felt a contentment so deep it was like a physical thing in her chest. This was happiness, she thought. Not the absence of pain or struggle, but the presence of love strong enough to weather any storm. It was knowing you were exactly where you belonged, with exactly the person you were meant to be with. It was looking back at the long road you had traveled and being grateful for every step, even the hard ones, because they had led you home. She had found her home that night in Jack's hay barn, though she had not known it then. She had found safety and shelter, yes, but she had also found something infinitely more precious. She had found a man who saw her not as property or a burden, but as a person worthy of respect and care. She had found a partner who would walk beside her through all the years to come, who would celebrate her victories and comfort her in sorrows, who would choose her every single day just as she chose him. And when they finally went inside that night, Jack's arm around her shoulders and Elizabeth leaning into his warmth, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The scared, desperate woman who had collapsed in that barn all those years ago had found everything she was searching for and more. She had found herself. She had found her strength. She had found her future, but most importantly, she had found love, true love, the kind that lasted a lifetime and beyond. And it had all begun with breakfast by a barn door and a cowboy kind enough to leave it there.